The federal government has invoked the Emergencies Act to supplement provincial and territorial capacity to address the blockades and occupations.
On February 14th, the Trudeau government invoked the Emergencies Act under the Public Order section. This allowed the government to freeze bank accounts, forcibly manipulate others to do their bidding with or without their consent, to commandeer tow truck companies against the conscience rights of the owners, and to stomp on our civil liberties, quite literally in some cases.
Finally, some relief for residents downtown. An Ontario Superior Court judge has granted an injunction to stop the constant horn honking.
The decision comes after a multi-million-dollar class action lawsuit was filed by a group of Ottawa residents. They argue the prolonged noise is causing permanent harm.
I definitely feel like I've been part of the silent majority, as you will.
I'm heading out on this traveler's road, and I won't find peace till the day we rest in harmony. Tell me what's so wrong if I choose to disagree. Taking how we want till we're living free. Fighting till we're living free. Oh, standing in unity.
Good morning. What do you want to tell the Commission this morning?
Yeah, so the first two witnesses were City of Ottawa residents. One of the residents was known to us because she had filed a large class action lawsuit against some of our clients in February, early February of 2022. Another witness was on the stand with her, and these were Ottawa residents, and they were there to tell the Commission about the impacts they felt and they observed.
I just remember feeling like it was such a surreal sight. It almost felt like you were in something like The Purge.
What was interesting is that a lot of the experiences that they talked about were secondhand experiences.
Though I didn't often see direct acts of violence.
In fact, one of the witnesses that was giving evidence, she was the one that assaulted some of the protesters by throwing eggs at trucks. And there was a clip of her verbally assaulting protesters and asking them to go back to their homes.
Well, you know, there were very large trucks parked everywhere, and in some of these instances, they were parked right next to some high-rise condo buildings. And as a result, some people may have gotten some cartons of eggs and, you know, had their little retaliation in frustration, because really, what else could they do?
When you confronted those protesters, do you remember saying to them, which was recorded, go back to where the fuck you were from?
I may have said that.
Okay. And people were upset. I get that. Completely understand that. And if you did that in my neighborhood, I'd be mad at you as well. But that's not what that hearing is about. The hearing is a matter of national security. And you didn't say to the Commission or see anything in your observations that could be classified as espionage or sabotage?
I'm sorry?
You didn't see anything that could be classified as espionage or sabotage?
No.
Thank you. With respect to Zexi Lee and all of the impact that it had, the impact has nothing to do, the impact they felt has nothing to do with whether or not there was reasonable grounds that there was a national security threat to Canada.
Ms. DeLaronde, you told us a bit about the honking and how you experienced that. After the protests were over, what was your experiences with honking sounds?
Anytime I heard a honk of a horn, and particularly a large vehicle horn, I could feel it sort of ripple through my body. and I would feel that my nerves were still frayed. I kept hearing them like phantom horns. I kept hearing them in my head.
Miss, why do you think excessive honking means that the government should strip citizens away from their rights?
I didn't say you're not allowed. He has no comment. You ignoring you.
Perfect. Thank you, ma'am.
I don't think it had a relevance to the inquiry in the sense that it demonstrated that there was these other tools available, short of invoking the Emergencies Act. And as I testified to when I was subpoenaed to testify in the inquiry itself, it always surprised me that the city, neither or the federal government or the provincial government never applied for an injunction for the vehicles to leave. I mean, the city did apply for a modified form of injunction that we received on the 14th of February, like way in. But I was really surprised that the scope of the injunction, the first one we dealt with, was only about horns.
You know, it took a private resident to, come forward with an injunction to stop the horns. That's where, in my opinion, the city failed in its responsibility to residents. The declaration of an emergency was just that. It was symbolic. Nothing occurred as a result of that. Horns didn't stop. Trucks didn't stop idling. The harassment didn't stop.
Plus a number of microaggressions that are described. People were scared to leave, even if they weren't in the red zone. And when they left, there was a number of incidents near the red zone, which created additional anxiety.
The first time I ever heard of the word microaggression was at the inquiry. That's not something that we study in law school or as part of criminal law. And you would think that if the federal government is enacting that tool, like I mentioned, the most egregious tool that they have in order to quell what they describe a national security threat, you wouldn't be talking about little microaggressions. I'm not even sure what that is exactly. And there was just so much talk about that. Is it somebody's hurt feelings? I don't even know. Maybe that's all it was, because that's not law. That clearly wasn't what people were charged with, because there were no charges of microaggression.
In your evidence, you made use of a term you referred to as microaggression. Is that right?
I believe so, multiple times.
Okay. Is microaggression, is your understanding of that it means verbal and environmental slights?
Je suis francophone, donc si vous voulez être spécifique sur les mots, va falloir que vous...
I'm francophone, so if you want to ask me specific things about words, you're going to have to ask me in French. You're asking me a theory about how to define something. Unfortunately, my knowledge of English terminology is perhaps not sufficiently appropriate, Commissioner.
Je m'appelle Brendan.
My name is Brendan.
That's not anything to do with national security. I did not expect that. I did not expect the hearing to be what it was.
Do you know why the Parliamentary Protective Service was trying to reach the mayor's office?
Yes.
And what reason is that?
They wanted to share their concerns around the fact that they did not like the idea of seeing more trucks move into the Wellington precinct. And they further shared the information that there could be theoretically a bomb in one of the trucks.
There was a lot of trying to make a situation worse than it is, 100%. There was a lot of talk about fuel and the handling of fuel, and I can't even recall at this point if that was part of the bomb threat, because that was such an insignificant part. Like, the police, when that is their actual job, is to deal with a threat, especially one of that kind of serious violence. And they found that there was nothing to investigate, there was no issue. And rather than politicians leaving it at that, they fanned the flames. In my opinion, a lot of the politicians that did that, and it was said in evidence, that they made the situation worse for the police. Because if you're fanning those flames, people don't know if they're safe. They're, again, feeling unsafe because they're being told by politicians there's a problem here or there's a problem there, when in fact, the police were dealing with those issues.
I describe them as microaggression because they, it wasn't the punching in the face, but it was all these microaggressions in transit, walking to businesses, childcare, homeless shelters, a number of these incidents that created an unsafe environment. Pickup trucks, which is a different vehicle, which is a weapon in itself, but the weaponized description to me is really the rigs who take space on the street and make noise through the horns that you've shown in video.
At what point did you determine that this was no longer a protest and that it was an occupation?
Well, a couple of points. First, when more people started to arrive.
Say what was initially described as a peaceful protest has now turned into a siege of our downtown area.
Their intention was to go in and have them with these vulgar flags and swastikas and Confederate flags and so on swirling all over the place with the backdrop of Parliament Hill like they'd taken over the country.
Nasty people out there that just don't represent Canada. Reminds me of the Republican Party down south. Can't reason with them, so vulgar and hateful, attacking people, ripping masks off, honking their horns.
Yeah, it's rhetoric. It's rhetoric and it has an aim, right? So these are individuals who are politicians. They are not law enforcement. They are not security and intelligence operatives. They are not folks that actually are the individuals who would typically be dealing with something like this.
If they won't go, how do you move them out? Tow truck companies are giving cities the cold shoulder.
But it's not just resources police are lacking. It's a willingness of tow truck drivers in Ottawa and elsewhere to help.
There's no way I'm towing any supporters or trucks.
Some people's views are different than others, but when it comes down to it, it's still the trucking industry that you have to service on a regular basis.
First was their own safety. I think they felt that trying to tow a vehicle without the site being secured in amongst protesters, you could imagine, it could be quite conflictual when you're trying to take someone's truck and people are still around the truck. So they were concerned about that. They were concerned about the damage potentially to their own vehicle should things get out of hand, and it's a cost to their business. Some were concerned that they do business with truckers and trucking companies, and that this would damage them reputationally and they would lose business. Some were sympathizers or supported the protests and didn't feel that they were going to offer their services to do it. Those were generally the reasons.
So tow trucks was a red herring, and even if it weren't, so let me get this straight. We're going to invoke the Emergencies Act because of tow trucks?
But the city would have had the authority to ticket and tow vehicles regardless of whether they were involved in the protests or not. Is that correct?
We have the authority to ticket and tow, yes.
All right, thank you.
They had access to tow trucks. They got access to tow trucks. They secured access to tow trucks before the invocation of the Emergencies Act. In fact, there were some things about the Emergencies Act that made some of the towing companies less comfortable than they previously were immediately prior to the invocation of the Emergencies Act.
There was an agreement reached with the protesters, is that correct?
That's correct.
And per the agreement, some of the vehicles were to be relocated to Wellington Street, is that correct?
That's correct.
But the city can nevertheless consider it a short-term victory for residents overwhelmed by protests?
Yes.
So it's true that on February 14th, 2022, the protesters began to move the trucks with the support of OPS, is that right?
They did that Monday morning, they started, yes.
Right. And is it not true that it was OPS who ended the operation?
Yes.
That was an opportunity that the city had, and they actually took advantage of it late. The federal government had, the province of Ontario had, was just to talk to the people in Ottawa.
They were clearly frustrated. They were on their own. They felt no one was coming to help them. And I think they got to the point, well, if we're stuck with this, let's see if we can try and solve it and de-escalate it ourselves. And I think that was their impetus to reach out. And I think, as you've heard, had the police not blocked us, had the Prime Minister and others not intervened, we would have successfully de-escalated and moved the protest to what we were planning for its next phase.
Ontario Police Service members on the call shared concerns about the plan.
Chief Slowly did share some concerns about the plan for my operational capacity to be able to affect the plan, as I stated earlier.
But they did state, the OPS members that were present did state that the agreement could ease tensions. Is that right?
Yes.
And by carrying out the agreement, it could also increase the police's capacity to respond.
Yes.
And Sergeant Lee got that phone call. He walked away and he came back, and the look on his face said everything. I knew that he had just had the carpet pulled out from under his legs, and he said there's no deal. And so I was very concerned. I knew I couldn't go back to the truckers and say, hey, we spent all day convincing you to do this, and now the police have reneged on it. I knew that there would be no further chance of ever getting them to even be open to the idea of moving had I gone back and delivered that message to them.
It's funny because the hearing went on like 6 times longer than the act was even invoked for. It didn't have to be that long. In my view, it should have been no more than 2 weeks, and it should have consisted solely of essentially federal government witnesses, as well as the police intelligence witnesses from the OPP and the OPS and other relevant agencies. The great majority of the evidence from non-federal and intelligence actors, in my view, is entirely useless.
Before they arrived on the 28th, we had no experience, and all of the experience as they moved across was that they were lawful and that they indicated they were coming to lawfully protest in Ottawa. That experience package changed for us on the 28th.
Steve Bell was the interim chief of police at the time of after the Emergencies Act was invoked and when the police were violently pushing and beating and charging and assaulting the civilians in Ottawa.
Tell me I'm the one to blame. So they cast their stones and put me to shame. Damn your lies, you are a master in disguise. Tell me what's so wrong if I choose to disagree. We're taking highway